Disney's The Hunchback of Notre Dame is probably not the first movie most people think about when they think of Disney. Whether they're thinking about traditional animation,
where are we really going? An elephant graveyard. Wow! Shh!
Or computer animation.
Hello, I am Baymax, your personal healthcare companion.
But it is by far my favorite Disney movie.
Warm and loving glow, though I might wish with all my might.
The dark themes, the music,
safe behind these windows and these parapets of stone,
its grandness. And seeing myself in Quasimodo.
No, this is where I belong.
It feels like the Disney movie that was dreamt up for me. But as with all productions, there were a lot of dreams along the way that got dashed or changed. And there were a lot of dreams that came true. Many of which you probably never heard about. But who had these dashed dreams?
Who?
What were the dreams that came true?
What?
How did all of this happen?
How?
Hush, and Filmflux will tell you.
It is a tale of a man and a monster.
For those unaware, Disney's The Hunchback of Notre Dame is about a deformed man named Quasimodo who lives in isolation in Notre Dame Cathedral. All Quasimodo wants is to be accepted and part of a world that he thinks will hate and fear him. This fear is what keeps Quasimodo in the cathedral, as does Judge Claude Frollo, a justice minister for Paris who acts as Quasimodo's surrogate father and master. Frollo is a complex and heinous villain who wants nothing more than to kill every gypsy, and to do so with a false sense of religious righteousness, as he feels gypsies are demons that negatively influence the regular people around them.
So typical of your kind to twist the truth, to cloud the mind with unholy thoughts.
When a gypsy named Esmeralda stands up to Frollo,
Justice!
He fixates on her and lusts and pursues her with all his power, at the cost of Paris and her citizens. Frollo basically gives her a choice. Become his willing sex slave,
Choose me
or just sleep with him, he doesn't specify, or die.
or the fire.
As Esmeralda becomes the most wanted criminal in Paris, she is eventually helped by Quasimodo and Frollo's right-hand man, Captain Phoebus.
Sir, she claimed sanctuary. There's nothing I can do.
Disney's The Hunchback of Notre Dame is somewhat based on the French novel Notre Dame de Paris by Victor Hugo, though the pitch for the movie came from Disney development executive David Stein in 1993, who was originally inspired by the illustrated comic version. Hugo wrote the novel, in part, to help draw attention to the cathedral itself and make people aware of its value. Eventually, after Stein's pitch, the Disney studio chair at the time, Jeffrey Katzenberg, put Beauty and the Beast directors Gary Truesdale and Kirk Wise on the project. Alan Menken and Stephen Schwartz, the musical duo behind Pocahontas, also joined the project. According to Truesdale, Katzenberg had gone to both parties and used each one as bait for the other.
Each being used to sell the other.
Yeah. Which was kind of flattering that we were actually being used as bait.
Schwartz said that they used some of the film's storyboards to help them conceptualize the songs. The storyboard artists were Paul and Gaetan Brizzi, also known as the Brizzi brothers. They were running their own animation studio in Paris, but were brought to Los Angeles to storyboard for the film. Much of the dark aesthetic found throughout Hunchback might be attributed to the brothers' captivating storyboards. Schwartz was part of a research team Disney sent to Paris, and he used to sit in the bell tower of Notre Dame and imagine he was Quasimodo living his entire life in a tower, looking out at the city. In an email Q&A, he said, "What would I see from that vantage point in 1482? How would I feel?" So many of the lyrics came from that. By the time I returned from the trip, the song was written. In an interview with the LA Times, Tab Murphy, who wrote the original screenplay, said it was decided early on that Quasimodo would be the center of the story, as he was in past live-action film adaptations, notably the Charles Laughton version from 1939. We started to toss around the idea of Quasimodo, the forlorn character trapped in the bell tower, and suddenly the bell tower becomes a character. We thought that if you were trapped alone, you would have to have an imagination and kind of live a fantasy to make such a gloomy environment have some charm. And ultimately, the character we created for Quasi was a benevolent, sweet-natured, charming person. The voice of this sweet-natured Quasimodo was almost Mandy Patinkin, as it was one of Patinkin's dream roles.
Hello. My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
However, due to disagreements with Disney over the character, Patinkin dropped out. You can sort of see what kind of Quasimodo Patinkin would be if the role were more in line with what he pictured for the character. A year after Disney's Hunchback was released, a TV movie co-starring Richard Harris and Selma Hayek debuted. In fact, Patinkin wanted the role so badly that when they offered it to him, he told the film's execs, "You really don't have to pay me." And his agent, who was also there, said, "I would sort of like you to pay him." Patinkin worked with a kinesiologist to figure out how to train his body to support the performances he wanted to do, which he largely based on Lon Chaney, who played the Hunchback in 1923, and Charles Laughton, who played the role in 1939.
You would think there'd be nothing more wrong with me, wouldn't you? But I'm deaf too. It's horrible. Huh?
Patinkin's performance was so intense he had to have an electric fan and someone stretching him in between takes, just so he could move. But Patinkin wasn't the only one with dreams for the character.
You think that is the last straw, don't you? Yeah.
According to Jim Hill Media, it was Cyndi Lauper's dream to be in a Disney movie. For years, she would tell various executives at Disney that she wanted to be in one of their animated features. And for years, the Disney execs were all like, "We hear you. One day, we may give you a call." So Lauper metaphorically sat next to her Disney phone, and one day she got a call to work on Hunchback. And the call wasn't to work on a big character like Esmeralda. It was to work on one of the gargoyle characters, which at the time was named Quinn, after Anthony Quinn, who played Quasimodo in the 1956 French-Italian version of the film. Now I know most people don't like the gargoyles, and I admit that growing up, when I rewatched my VHS copy of the film, I fast-forwarded A Guy Like You.
Guy like you.
But the gargoyles aren't all bad.
And maybe Frollo's wrong about the both of us.
What did she say?
Frollo's nose is long and he wears a truss.
Ha! Told you. Pay up.
Oh, dear.
Chump.
And Lauper's enthusiasm for the role speaks to that. Lauper was still excited to live out her dream of being in a Disney movie, flew out to California for an audition, and got the part. But as the recording sessions went on, directors Weiss and Truesdale started to notice that the character of Quinn sounded too close in age to Quasimodo, and they needed someone with a little more wisdom. They tried some script rewrites and had additional recording sessions, but it didn't work. And Lauper, despite doing a great job, had to be let go. It wasn't even her fault. The directors had simply envisioned the voice for the role incorrectly. Eventually, Lauper would go on to voice a nurse in the animated DVD movie Henry and Me.
You're gonna have beautiful dreams.
Though one could make a case that she sings in the Backyardigans and Bob's Burgers. But she never worked with Disney again. Her dream never came true. Lauper's role was given to industry veteran Mary Wickes. Wickes' career began in the late 30s, but many people will remember her from Sister Act.
There's a word for this. Mutiny.
Wickes brought the heart and humor and wisdom that the directors were looking for. But even Wickes was unable to finish her part. She died at the age of 85, just shortly after they finished A Guy Like You, the song that I always skipped on my VHS copy of the movie. With still a few pickup lines to do, Disney hired Wickes' lifelong friend Jane Withers, who was able to do an impression of Wickes in order to finish up the movie. Now I know a lot of people only care about the final product, and how the gargoyles changed the movie overall.
Want a wine and cut the cheese.
But I think it's worth considering how much time and effort and love went into their creation. That it was someone's dream to play in the role just so they could be in a Disney movie, which was apparently also the case with Jason Alexander. And that the role of one of the gargoyles ended with a tribute to a departed friend.
Don't you ever migrate?
It's the kind of thing we don't need to know, but might want to if we just asked. Like how Tom Hulce, the voice behind Quasimodo in Disney's Hunchback, was never asked in his career whether or not he could sing. In an interview with Billboard magazine, Hulce said it wasn't until being cast in the role of Quasimodo that he was asked if he could sing or not. In the mid-80s to 90s, Hulce appeared in a number of films, most famously for his Oscar-nominated role as Mozart in the film Amadeus. After Hunchback, Hulce largely retired from acting and focused on his new passion, which was directing and producing stage productions. But imagine a world where he'd quit acting just a few years earlier, and we missed out on his dulcet singing voice.
And up there, living in the sun.
According to Alan Menken, he already had the musical motif for Out There before they began, and played it for Schwartz, who immediately loved it.
We just decided we were going to do this project, and we hadn't written anything. I said, I have this piece of music, and I played this for him in its entirety. It didn't have a title, didn't have obviously anything associated with it, and it became Out There.
It became the song Out There. I just loved it as soon as I heard it.
And it seemed to capture a palette for the project.
The music in The Hunchback of Notre Dame is one of my favorite things about it, and I don't usually like musicals.
I don't know if you would listen to a gypsy's prayer.
But I love something about its power and grandness, as though it was designed to match the grandeur of the cathedral itself. Stephen Schwartz has always felt that Hunchback is Alan Menken's best score, and Menken himself thinks that the opening number, The Bells of Notre Dame, is the best opening number he's ever written. I remember learning that many of the lyrics in the songs were Latin, and spent time looking up the translations on them. I thought Kyrie eleison sounded cool, and I'm pretty sure they inspired some now-defunct websites and usernames. According to Stephen Schwartz, the Latin from the beginning of The Bells of Notre Dame translates to, "Someday, someday, God speed this bright millennium." Which of course are the lyrics in the song "Someday," which appears at the end of the film. But it's not just the music or lyrics that inspired me when I was younger. It was Quasimodo himself, who was largely crafted by screenwriter Tab Murphy. Murphy has worked on a number of screenplays including Gorillas in the Mist, Tarzan, Atlantis: The Lost Empire, Brother Bear, and even some of the new Thundercats. In a recent interview, Murphy told a story where he attended a screening at a film school for Gorillas in the Mist for a Q&A. Murphy said that the Q&A was rather unenthusiastic until the moderator mentioned all the Disney films Murphy had worked on, and suddenly every hand shot up. To this day, Murphy says people tell him how they identified with Quasimodo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame. That they felt like an outsider or alone or different from everyone else at a particular time in their lives. Kind of like how when Esmeralda shows Quasi the faintest bit of interest and kindness, he wants to show her everything in his life.
That's little Sophia, and Jean-Marie, Anne-Marie, Louise-Marie.
Doesn't take much to let people into our weird, introverted lives, to ask us about a thing we've been obsessing over alone, which suddenly allows us the chance to share it. Like Lester Bang says in Almost Famous,
"The only true currency in this bankrupt world is what you share with someone else when you're uncool."
And when Quasimodo sees Esmeralda kiss Phoebus, it reaffirms what Quasi and I believed deep down, that the world isn't meant for us, just like we thought. In the climax of the film, Esmeralda is trapped on a stake, and Quasimodo swings down to save her after the gargoyles convince him to believe in himself.
Back where she belongs.
I always get so fired up when I watch this sequence, and I finally realized why. The climax isn't about saving Esmeralda. It's about a war between two beliefs. Frollo thinks the world is a cruel place because the devil makes it so by infecting the hearts of men through gypsies.
Gypsies are not capable of real love.
He thinks damnation and control are the only answers to this devilry. And forces Quasimodo to believe in the worst in the world and himself.
You are deformed.
I am deformed.
And you are ugly.
And I am ugly.
And these are crimes for which the world shows little pity.
And when Quasimodo saves Esmeralda, I feel this electricity throughout my whole body. Because it means Frollo's beliefs lose, and Quasi's hope wins. Because if Quasimodo can believe in himself and the world, I can too. It's tempting to look at Disney's Hunchback as part of a money-making machine that's trying to rebuild itself. To look at the gargoyles as unnecessary goofballs that help get a G rating for the film. But it's important to remember the love that goes into these movies. These animators and storytellers and voice actors, whose work inspired generations of people who saw it, and despite perceived flaws or imperfections, will always look back on what it meant to them. I think that's why when the real-life Notre Dame Cathedral was on fire, an architect and illustrator by the name of Cristina Correra Freire drew this. Notre Dame Cathedral is an icon for Paris, which makes this a tragedy for the world, and I in no way intend to diminish the tragedy or loss of history or culture, but I see this artist's drawing as a personal response. And the fact that it went viral suggests to me that it was a response that was echoed by a lot of people, including me. That beautiful cathedral, which inspired a man to write a novel about it, which inspired a comic, which inspired an animated classic, which inspired me, is on fire. That symbol which spawned so many dreams, some that came true, some that didn't, is burning. And every part of me that ever felt alone, that was finally recognized in art, was burning with it. It's why Steven Schwartz gets more emails about Hunchback by far than his other two animated movies. And why Tab Murphy still gets people telling him how much they identified with Quasimodo. Disney's The Hunchback of Notre Dame is an imperfect film, riddled with tone issues and silly gargoyles. But in retrospect, that only makes the film's message of acceptance more meaningful. It's a place of dreams. Some that came true, some that didn't. That tells us no matter how we look, or how alone we feel, or how imperfect we are, that we can all feel this way. It unites us into this very weird collective and hope that reaches high above the tops of the towers of Notre Dame Cathedral and tells us all that despite our imperfections, we too can be accepted and loved.